My name, for those of you who may not know me, my name is Jim McKenna. I'm the town manager, and thrilled to be here tonight to welcome all of you to participate in what we hope is a very thorough and creative dialogue on the economic development strategies of the community. We've been talking about some of these issues in amongst most of us for a number of years. And finally, with the help of the Collins Center and their staff, UMass Boston, who's led us in a thorough research and cultivated a number of new initiatives and strategies for us to consider tonight. We're very hopeful that we can create a visioning statement that comes out of tonight and goes forward as a way to help your decision makers and policy makers guide appropriate and creative ideas to enhance the commercial development of the town and the economic development interests of the town. I can't open this without recognizing a couple of folks who've been very important in this conversation. Russ Sanford has led the council's interest in making sure that we develop a plan that captures a lot of what's been talked about recently. So I thank Russ for his leadership on the council and the Economic Development Subcommittee for helping steer this forward. We have Council President Gill, who will say a couple of words in just a moment. You and your leadership on the council also, is very important for us to feel the lift and the encouragement to pursue new ideas and new strategies for taking out the front window, as we say. We have Councilor Boncori here tonight as well. Thank you, Phil, for being here. You've always been very supportive of the business community and looking to see that it gets strengthened. You'll learn some things tonight. I've read both the capsule draft that's been produced and the visioning statements that come with it, and I learned some things. And I think you'll find this to be a very a deep dive in some of the facts you might not have been aware about Winthrop, how we sit strategically in the region, and some of the things that, the assets that we have that we need to fully deploy and optimize as a community. I'd like to thank Joe Demilovitz of my office in helping to coordinate this process as we've gone through it over the past few months and working collaboratively with the Collins Center. Thank you, Joe, for your effort. Everybody that's been involved. I know all of you have at some level already been advocates and strong supporters of the community. So many of them here tonight. It's great to have you in one room, in one place, to do a little more constructive and hands-on help with this, so that we do come out with something that we can all sort of embrace as what we hope to be, a community visioning statement of the community, and to develop that so we can move it forward in terms of policy and how we grow and improve this community. So with that, I'd like to ask Council President Gill to come up and share his thoughts.
Thank you, Jim. I want to echo the thanks and recognition that Jim gave to everybody, and the closest ones to us, Russ on the council, who is our economic development chairman. He's really been a leader in this, and Joe, I want to recognize our fellow councilor. Jim always leaves somebody out, and tonight he left somebody out again, who was very instrumental, and in fact started this whole process, and it's Jim McKenna. He's the one for whom we can give the credit. He's got great vision. He brought this study in, and we owe him a great deal. I read the report, and as I read the report, lots of things came out that we've sort of been hearing people say. You say, wouldn't this be a good idea? Wouldn't this be a good idea? And to see them all pulled together, and then references to other communities and how these things that they're talking about could be positive to us, how they work in other communities, was really enlightening, and I want to thank you folks. And most of all, thank you for each one of you being here tonight to listen to this program. Thanks, Jim.
Yes, thank you, President. So without any further ado, I'll turn things over to Monica Lamboy, who's led the Collins Center initiative, and she can introduce the team and then talk a little bit about the context of the evening. Thanks.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. We're very pleased to be here. We don't have a microphone tonight, so if you can't hear, just raise your hand. My name is Monica Lamboy. I'm with the Collins Center at UMass Boston, and I'm here with my colleagues Shelley Airbase and Rob May. And if you don't know about the Collins Center, we are a group at UMass Boston, so we're part of the state, and we were specifically created by the state legislature to help cities and towns in any need that they may have. In this case, we are doing strategic planning, but we also do leadership training, we do HR, we do all sorts of different things. So we are here to help support you in whatever your town or your community might need. So for the agenda for tonight, and thank you for coming out on a beautiful evening, what we are going to do is to start with looking at information. It's called a trends report. So just as Jim said, in a strategic plan, you want to use the information available to find out what your strengths are, what some areas that are weakness, and to try to figure out where are those strengths that we can grow, where are those areas of weakness that we can turn around, and where might be some areas that it may not be wise to invest energy in because it might not be in the future for the community. So we're going to start with a bit of data. You all have handouts of the slides of the information. Then, and this is what's most important, is we want to hear from you. We have been working with a wonderful steering committee of people who have spent many, many hours of time with us. If the steering committee members could raise your hand, you can see that here. So we've been spending time digesting information, coming up with ideas, strategies, goals, and actions, but we really want to hear from you how those resonate, and I'm sure there's going to be things that we haven't thought of that you've been thinking of and been burning to say. So that's what the second half of this meeting, actually more than half of the meeting, we'll have roundtable discussions at the different tables. And what we'll be able to do is have 3 rounds. I'll explain this again at the end. So you'll be able to go to 3 different tables, 3 out of 7 during the course of the evening. We'll do a little report out and then we'll talk about next steps. So our economic trends report is online. If it's not, it will be, and it looks like this. It's a lot of information to digest. And in it, we talk a little bit about data sources and history, but then we move quickly to look at the residential population. When you think of your businesses, who are the most ready customers are the residents that live nearby. So we want to look at the buying power that residents have. We also, residents coming to labor force. So we look at what sorts of educational attainment, what sorts of field people work in. Then we move into looking at the businesses themselves, how many jobs, what kinds of areas. Land use, you can't do anything without land. So what does the land use look like today? How might it be used in the future? And then we did a business survey. We're going to give you some information about the results. These are just some of the data sources that we use. Pretty much any economic plan is going to look at the census, looking at some county business patterns, etc. So, history. I have had a great opportunity to talk to Dave Hubbard, and he's been really instrumental in helping me understand the history of this community. It's a really fascinating community, and the history that has come helps set the stage for where we are today. The work that we're doing tonight is going to help set the stage for 50 years from now, for 100 years from now. So if you look at the history of the community, started as a farming community. For several centuries, the Winthrop was almost exclusively agriculture, producing grasses to help feed the animals that were in Boston, and then eventually hosting cattle and different kinds of animals here. Fishing, no surprise, was surrounded by water, became an important industry. There are some really fascinating military installations here, including some fortifications from the Revolutionary War era. Salt works, again, based on the water. Then a copper mill came in. One of the sons of Paul Revere opened a copper mill on Point Shirley. The railroads really made the population take off. Once people could get here on the railroad, they saw what a beautiful environment was. They started to move in. Lodging has had a really important history. The first hotel was the Taft Inn, was at 1840 something. You could predominantly get here by ferry, That's how most people got here. But they had they had room for 1,000 people at lunch, and they had 200 hotel rooms in the 1800s here. The Winthrop Hospital is an important figure in the history, and then the importance of the neighborhoods in Deer Island as we move forward into the current day. So what we do in our study is we look at comparison communities. It helps you understand, helps us understand where Winthrop might be within the region. These are the different comparison communities, and you'll see data throughout the presentation that we use. So again, we're going to start talking about the residential population and the labor force. So one of our first findings is that Winthrop's population has declined since the 1970s. There was a really large boom from 1840 on all the way up to about 1960, where the population leveled off, and then it began to decline and has sort of declined and maybe is an upturn most recently. But what we saw in a lot of central cities in the US in particular is in the era after World War II, population did go down as people moved out to the suburbs. But many communities start to turn around in the 1990s, maybe the 2000s, and you would start to see the population pick up again. So we haven't yet seen that change in Winthrop where the population picks up, but it's absolutely a wonderful place to live, I'm sure, and just a beautiful place to be. But the population has to do with how much buying power we have. The more people we have, the more purchasing power there is. There's more people that could walk into the stores on a daily basis. And we also looked at the percent of population. Winthrop has a higher median age than the state, a pretty substantially higher median age. 43.7 is the median age in Winthrop. The Commonwealth is 39.1. If we look at close-in inner core communities of Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, they're in the 30s. They're in the 30s. So you see very young people that are going out. Here we have an older population. Again, how this relates to businesses is that we know households with children spend a lot of money. Those of us who have children know we spend a lot of money. Households that are newly forming, people that are moving out of their parents' house or getting their first apartment, spend quite a bit of money to set that unit up. So looking at those kinds of populations and our age is relevant in that area. We also found that in Winthrop, we have a higher level of high school graduation and college graduation than the state average, which is really wonderful and should be acknowledged and really cherished. But we don't happen to have a large population with advanced degrees, or there's fewer percentage of residents with advanced degrees that live in Winthrop today. We all know that salary and opportunity oftentimes goes with education, so that's why we looked at the education in the community. This graphic, and maybe I'll see better in the handouts, shows that more readily, where you can see really the big jump in median income when you have an advanced degree, graduate or professional degree. Given this, it's not surprising to know that of the comparison communities, Winthrop was pretty much in the middle of the comparison communities in terms of household income. $62,000 in 2012 was the median income in Winthrop. The state has $66,600. So here we have $4,700 less per household on average that we can spend in our local shops and our local communities. Some of our communities had considerably higher income, although some also had lower. So then we wanted to look at, how many people are in the workforce here and what they do. What we can see from this graphic is that the number of residents in the workforce has had some peaks and some valleys, some of which have been moving with the economic trends, particularly the most recent downturn in 2008 to 2009. But there also is an interesting downturn in the 2000s in terms of residents working, which is contrary to the Commonwealth, because those were pretty healthy economic years in the Commonwealth. And we've actually had a net decrease of 733 people working, residents who are working, which is a greater number of loss than the actual number of residents that went down in that time period. As a result, we compare to our comparison communities, we see that Winthrop is the only community in comparison that has fewer people working today than they did in 1990. Others have had substantial increases. Again, talks to buying power. Not surprisingly, a large number of Winthrop residents use public transit to get to work, higher than the state average. What we found is that it's actually a shorter commute. The commute time for people on transit is less in Winthrop than it is in the comparison communities. It would be faster. I was on the Blue Line tonight, so wouldn't mind if it was a little bit faster. We also looked at what kinds of job sectors, what does your employer do? If you're a resident, what does your employer do? And we found, consistent with the Commonwealth, a lot of people work in education, healthcare and social services, information, finance, and real estate. A lot of people in professional, scientific, and then administrative kinds of jobs. So this graphic says, what does your employer do? Then we looked at what kinds of jobs do you do? Are you a manager? Are you a worker? So if you worked in a retail establishment and you were a manager, you would show up under management. So we found that there's a good number of people working in office and administrative support, working in management, working in sales-related jobs. And so there are quite healthy incomes in there, the $40,000 to $70,000 range. But we did see some of the highest paying jobs in the Commonwealth, arts, architecture, computers, healthcare. We didn't have as many residents working in those kinds of super high paid jobs. Okay, with that, we're gonna move into the local business economy. And here we're gonna look at what kinds of jobs do the businesses offer in Winthrop.
My second finding this evening is that over the last 24 years, Winthrop has lost a little over 1,100 jobs. As you can see, most of the other communities, even Hull, which has stayed fairly flat, have actually gained employment, or gained the number of employees in their community. And if I put on my glasses, I can read my notes. The areas that Winthrop lost employment are also the main areas of, are the major employment sectors in this area. So education and healthcare, we lost 414 jobs. Transportation, trade, utilities, 150 jobs. And then professional and business employment is down 58 jobs. As we move forward, we now look at number of jobs in the community, and you can see that we're just a little bit above Hull, but we lag behind most of the other communities that we sample. And I went a little bit further and took a look at this and at jobs per square mile of land area. Winthrop has approximately 885 jobs per square mile. The one that really surprised me was Chelsea, which has 6,158 jobs per square mile. So they really cram a lot of economic vitality into that small space. Now, Chelsea's not much bigger than Winthrop here. It's probably not the same kind of environment that we want to have here in Winthrop, but it's just an example to show you how much space and land and built environment can really affect the number of jobs. Residents per workforce. Winthrop has less than 0.2 jobs per resident. So this really is saying that most 98% of the people in Winthrop are moving off the peninsula for their employment opportunities. So they're all working someplace else. And I'm sure if you've been on the bridge in the morning, you can see those coming in and out just like a tide. Next finding, Winthrop's economy is dominated by small establishments and family-owned entrepreneurial type establishments. But you can see the breakdown in the number of employees per establishment. And so most most businesses are 1 to 4 employees, with very few larger, over 20 employees. In some of those establishments, there's 5 food service operators that are in that category, 2 large retailers, to healthcare and social service providers, transportation, and other services. Now, one thing we did know, and should know about this, is that where the payroll is being processed also affects the employment numbers. So we found a daycare provider, social service agency, had a huge employment spike. Most of those people don't work here, but their paychecks are being processed here. So they're being counted as employees here in the community. So while it's great to say I've got X number of jobs, those jobs really aren't here and they're not spending money here, which is very unfortunate. Establishments by sector, you can see there's a very large retail sector, retail trade here. A lot of construction firms, and most of these are very small operations, even some that are being run out of somebody's garage. And then as you move further down the line, lodging and food service, wholesale trade, and there's 2 manufacturing establishments that we were able to find out of this data. So there's really opportunity when you look forward to growing that retail trade, to growing the lodging and hospitality, and some interesting opportunities for manufacturing, this small craft manufacturing. But we'll get that in the next presentation. Here we're looking at the contraction or where people work, and it corresponds very highly with the jobs that are similar in the state. So it's education and health sector, leisure and hospitality, trade, transportation, and utilities. Those are the big sectors that employ here, and they're also the big sectors that employ throughout the state. So we have a nice match there. I want to take a look at the retail sector. This is information that comes to us from a company called Claritas. It's a division of AC Nelson, the people who count how many times you turn on your television. Well, they have data about everything. And they use U.S. Census information, and then they gather information from all sorts of different retail establishments across the country. And if you have one of those little cards that you stop at, Stop and Shop, and you scan it to get your % off, it's gathering that kind of information about your buying patterns, and it tracks you back. And so it can make some projections about what kind of money is being spent from the community. So in general, if you look at these large categories within a mile radius of Town Hall here, or of the school here, general merchandise, there's a demand for $36 million of shopping activity, but only 0.0, is that 40,000? 40,000, that is right. $40,000 are actually being spent in our community. So, for general merchandise. So there's $36 million that are leaving this peninsula, leaving our community, going someplace else. Food and beverage stores, grocery, delicatessens, things like that, $39 million, with $31 million of that going off the peninsula. Motor vehicle parts, $49 million, 26% going out. And food and drink establishments, $34 million in demand, 19 million is going off the peninsula. So when you look at the trends report, there's going to be a much deeper dive into this. And you'll look at things like the grocery store demand at 25 million, but there's sales of 6 million here. Sporting goods, 2.6 million in demand, 100,000 in sales. Office supplies, 4 million, a half a million is being spent here. So there's opportunities to grow and to capture that money, to keep it, we call it plugging the leakage gap. So there's money to be spent here in the community, which is a good opportunity for us to grow. And land use trends. Turn it over to Shelley. Oh, Monica.
sometimes when we're talking about economic development, residents may say, well, why do I really care about that? That's about businesses, it's not about me. But I hope you're picking up some of the things where it really does affect your quality of life. So if everybody in your neighborhood has to leave town to get a job, that means there's almost nobody left around during the day. Population goes down dramatically, particularly here. If there's no place for you to go get a cup of coffee or to go window shopping, those few minutes that you have to do something fun, there might not be something to do. So there really is a quality of life aspect to it, and that's kind of how the land comes into play. Where things are located, what do they look like, how do they feel when I'm there. So when we looked at the land use, and with 1.6 square miles, we don't have a lot of land to use or to waste. We got to be really efficient with it. We got data from the town assessor, who was very helpful. So one of the important findings we made is that the single largest non-residential user of land are clubs and lodges, and the golf course is part of that. So the single largest non-residential parcel is your golf course at 12 acres. That's a big parcel. Followed by the Elks Lodge at 2.4 acres. So there are some large parcels, but a lot of them are used for the lodges. So how do we use that as an economic development strategy, something we'll talk about later. You can see retail about 11 acres, mixed use about 10. Vacant land or parking, vacant land that's used for parking, we are using that interchangeably because there's no building on there. Over 6 acres. So that's a pretty substantial land use is really the lack of a use because it's a void in the landscape. Automotive, office, banks, lodging, etc. Another finding is that the parcels here are particularly tiny. So the 3/4 of the non-residential parcels are less than 10,600 square feet in size. That's less than a 1/4 acre. It's a tight parcel. A lot of them are 2,000, 3,000. So when you think about how could I maybe build on that or how could I maybe get another story, it gets complex because they're very tiny. There are a few larger areas, a few larger parcels, particularly near Belle Isle Seafood. Those are actually multiple parcels, but when they're conglomerated together, they're relatively large. We also have the Michaels Mall as one of the larger parcels in town. We also looked at how much square foot was the building versus how much square foot was the lot. And we found that most of the commercial buildings, this is not a surprise to you, are 2 stories or lower. And many of them have sizable seas of parking around them. So this is, it's called graffiti. And so it's this planner graffiti. I colored over the parking lots at Michael's Mall and Nick's, and then the municipal lot. So you can see the amount of land used for parking relative to building. You can debate who's winning on that struggle there. Part of the reason that we do have so much parking are the parking requirements in the town, and for such a walkable community, it's beautiful to walk around here. I've done quite a bit of walking already. Looking at the policy foundation, are we actually accidentally creating something? What this graphic shows is, in the kind of orangey color, is how much of the use there would be. So 1,000 square feet of lodging, you actually have to have more square feet of parking than you have of the use, particularly for restaurants. So for a restaurant, a 1,000 square foot restaurant has to have thousands of square feet of parking around it. So that's going to affect how close the buildings can be. It's going to affect how you might feel walking from shop to shop. So that policy it does have an influence on the built environment. We also found that many commercial properties meet the definition of underutilized. And for economic development, that means that the building is less valuable than the land. And many of the parcels were underutilized. On the flip side, there were some parcels that did have a value in the building that was substantial. And so in the table here, we talk about some of the buildings that have a lot of value. But the value of the building and the land together has to do with how much tax revenue you all are getting as a community. We're all getting as a community. So in finding 16, what we found is that the vast majority of resources that are coming into the town is supported by the residential taxpayer. So only 7% of Winthrop's overall property taxes are from commercial property. There's no one reason. Some of it is there's not that much commercial property. Another reason is that some of the buildings on the commercial parcels may not be very new or very large. So it's the land area and then the building value together. We do see different stories in other communities. Everett, for example, over 60% of the revenue is from the commercial property. Cambridge is up in the 80, 70, 80%. So there's some communities have made a strategy to say, I want to grow my commercial tax base because I can get more services and I can maybe if not alleviate with the residential taxpayer, try to hold them more harmless from the increases. As a result, or one of the reasons, of all the comparison communities, Winthrop has the lowest per capita revenue stream from property tax, from all revenues actually. So you can see on the left, per person, revenue coming into the town is $2,738. Other communities, Swampscott, $4,200, Everett, over $4,000. So this speaks to how much money can we invest in our schools? How much money can we invest in our streets? How do we make sure our parks look really fantastic? So this is, again, where the quality of life and our business sector very much come together.
So we set out a survey to the businesses in Winthrop to understand their take on what it's like to do business in Winthrop, where their revenue is coming from, how do they feel like they are running a healthy business, and get any suggestion or other feedback that they had to offer. So we got back 46 surveys, so we heard from 46 businesses, and you can see here the different types of business divided by arranged by business sector. So as you can see, the businesses that we heard from the most, the type of businesses were retail trade, hotel and food services, finance and insurance, construction, and they did mirror fairly well the number of jobs and the number of establishments by sector that are here in Winthrop. So it was a pretty fair representative of what we have here in Winthrop. So finding 17, we looked at how old these businesses are and found that about 50% of the businesses were over 20 years old. The average business age was 28 years old. There were, out of our respondents, 7 businesses that were 5 years or younger, which speaks to a couple things. It could, it's good in that older businesses tend to be more stable. There's a high attrition rate for businesses that are within their first 5 years. But that also might speak to the fact that maybe there aren't a lot of new businesses coming up here in Winthrop. Oh, okay. And then, and most of the businesses were independent businesses. Over 90% operate independent businesses as opposed to a chain business. Finding 18, about half of the respondents lease their space as opposed to own the space that they're in. Which, leasing your space, you could be more dynamic. You could move if you need to. But if you own your space, you might be more stable. You might be able to ride out any economic downturn. So there are kind of pros and cons to both. Within the retail and the food and hotel sectors, the majority did lease their space. So where is the revenue coming from for these businesses? And maybe not a big surprise, but we found that a lot of revenue is generated from within Winthrop. Overall, among all respondents, almost 50% of total revenue was generated from customers in Winthrop. So that was 48%. If you look among the retail sector, which is the third row down, 77% of revenue on average among respondents is coming from customers here in Winthrop. So it talks about, hey, the locals are supporting their businesses, but the businesses are also very vulnerable and really need the local support and might want to think about expanding a little bit. And then if you look further on retail, 22%, so basically 99% is coming from within Massachusetts. a lot of that is very close to within Winthrop. Within hotel and food, well, there were two businesses who responded that they have some international customers. They'd get some of their revenue from international customers. Only one had a fairly significant amount of revenue, and that was within the hotel and food sector. And that business had also claimed that, that they opened up their business in Winthrop, at least in part to its proximity to the airport. So something that could be capitalized on. So how do folks get around Winthrop? How are customers getting to these businesses? Now, we just learned that a lot of the customers are from Winthrop, but a lot of them are driving. So that's what we found out from the businesses. So yeah, we're staying local, but we're taking our car to stay local. We're not getting a lot of folks walking. We're not getting a lot of folks biking. The subway, the commuter rail isn't playing much of a part at all. The MBTA, subway, the bus, you're getting some folks traveling by MBTA, not a whole lot. That also speaks to the employees that work within Winthrop. A lot of local employees, they're also driving. So even among those businesses that say, hey, we do get some folks to walk. For example, there were 23 of our respondents, of our businesses, who said, we have some customers who walk. Among those, on average, less than 20% are actually walking. So it might speak to the fact that, hey, people can walk here, but for some reason, it's just not ingrained that this is a great way of transportation around here. Okay, now next we looked at seasonality. So we wanted to understand, are businesses, is business stable all year round? Is the summer busier? Is the winter busier? And we found that over half of the businesses reported having some seasonality, and predominantly it was the summer and a little bit of spring that were driving that business. And then we looked, well, how have you done over the past few years? Has revenue gone up? Has revenue gone down? How have profits been? We found that a majority of the businesses said, hey, our revenues have gone up in the past 3 years. That said, among some of those same businesses, profits have gone down, which means that while revenues are rising, expenses are rising at a greater rate. So rising revenue is not always, the end-all be-all of the story. And the reason that the most common reason that we got for the expenses rising are, often things that are sort of out of their hands: insurance, healthcare, cost of the materials that they use to produce or that they're selling. How are businesses marketing themselves? We found that almost all the businesses reported that they use sort of word of mouth or customer referrals. Now that's kind of a very passive way of marketing, or it can be. It can be made less passive. It can be something that businesses really can harness and say, hey, how do I generate more customer referrals? How do I generate more word of mouth? And some of that can be done over the internet, or referral words. There's a whole host of different ways that can be done. But things like marketing on the internet, web pages, social media are not as predominantly used. So those less passive forms and those more technology-driven forms of marketing. And then we wanted to know why businesses, or why did you choose to open your business in Winthrop? And the by far most common response is, this is my home, I live in Winthrop, so this is where I opened my business. We didn't see, we saw proximity to downtown Boston, about a quarter, beautiful environment, supportive residential community, about a fifth, proximity to airport, a little under a fifth. We didn't see a whole lot of people say we have a strong town center. I wanted to open my business. We had a really strong town center, and I feel really supported there, and feel like I could give it a go here as opposed to elsewhere. And then proximity to MBTA, so really being on the commuter, on the blue line, near the blue line, isn't really driving. Isn't a driver for businesses to put in here.
So a couple of observations trying to pull everything together is that there is somewhat of a mismatch between the businesses, the jobs available, and the residential workforce. So you can see the total labor force in Winthrop is just under 9,800 people. There's only 1,771 jobs here. A lot of residents are involved in finance or professional services, information technology, administration, but there's only a few jobs of that nature. So those people are definitely leaving town to find employment. Again, we have 0.18 jobs per person in the workforce. And if you look at the areas where people really are working, the finance and professional services, there's actually only 0.07 jobs per resident in that particular job area. So again, that's how it ties in with the residents and the workforce. So now starting to move to think creatively. We are going to have a question and answer, so you can have a couple seconds to digest the data. But thinking about the future, a framework for the future, this is kind of how we think about how to be strategic, how to get your economy really going. First thing, the foundation of everything is your policy framework. What do we as a community aspire? What do we want to see? How do we put that into words? What does our zoning code say? What do our plans say? What's that policy foundation? Then your infrastructure, and a lot of times we don't think about sewers and street lights and all that kind of thing, but they're vitally important to making it a good place to work. Land, how is our land deployed? Are there catalyst projects? Are there particular projects where something happens there, other things might start popping? And then you get the pretty street lights and the bubble trees and the sun comes out at the end of the day. But it's really a layered on process, and when we start to talk about the strategies and the goals, you'll see that we're weaving those things together. So, thank you for your patience for listening to us. Are there any questions? Did anything look particularly odd, or maybe look like, oh, I knew that. Now somebody showed me the data. Does anybody have questions in the room?
I have a question. When you said that there's less jobs at one time, say 20 some odd years ago, the median age in Winthrop was older. So those baby boomers are now retired and they would show up as not working.
So there's two things. I know we went really fast. So the resident population that have gotten older, and you're right. So while we're seeing fewer people in the workforce, it's highly likely that's because people are retiring. They're like, we're done working, we're going to enjoy ourselves. So there's fewer workers. At the same time, and it may not be related, the total number of jobs in town went down. So between 1990 and 2010, 40% of the jobs that were physically located in the boundary of Winthrop have gone. So we sort of have two things that are going in the same direction, but they may not be related to each other.
How many businesses have closed in the last 20 years?
You know, we didn't look at the absolute number of businesses. We could do that.
How many are registered now?
240 was the number that we got in 2010. Again, a lot of them are very small. The vast majority are 1 to 4 employees, but there are 240 that we're showing. One caveat with the data is sometimes when people are subcontractors, like our realtors tend to be subcontractors, they don't show up in some of the data. So it's a qualified 240 businesses. Yes, ma'am.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm sort of seeing, what I'm getting out of this is that not necessarily a growth in business is required because we have limited land mass. We don't have the space to grow. We could grow taller, I suppose, as you pointed out. But perhaps like the type of business, the values of the business, a higher product, a higher service, a higher-end service, and people demanding that would be a different, different clientele, whatever. Now, we've got across the city, across the harbor here, fastest growing city in the country, neighborhood. So I imagine part of these discussions would be to kind of attract different folks here, because I do think that you are limited in terms of business growth. It's got to be, if you're changing the type of business, you're adding value, and you're adding to the tax base that way.
Sure. Yeah, so one of the things you'll see in the report that we didn't talk about is employers and employees are increasingly wanting to live places where they can walk around. The young tech people, they want to be someplace that's kind of hopping. They can go outside and get a lunch. So a lot of the physical infrastructure you have with the town center is really the kind of thing that those employers are looking for. So now, as we've talked about strategies, how do we capitalize on that? How do we make that happen? How do we open the door? And how do we get everybody on the same page as a community to say, this is what we want, as opposed to always, this is what we don't want. And so that's part of what we're going to talk about through the rest of the evening tonight. Yes, sir.
why do you use, denoting in the local jobs by municipality and comparing it with Beverly, Chelsea, and Salem, which have no relation to this town at all, as far as size and the range we have down here? Why would you use that as a comparison? You're using Hull and you're using Swampscott, which is more an order, but the other three are just completely out of our league. Chelsea is a completely industrial city, so why would you even think about it?
Well, we picked Chelsea just
I mean,
because
we're
they're
a
so close.
small local community, now boxed in by big stores surrounding us, making it very easy for every inhabitant in this community to get in the car and go to Revere shopping, go to Chelsea shopping, go to the local store. So the basic goal, I would say, what we are, how do we get some of those people to stay in town shopping instead of going outside where the box stores are? I mean, you go up to Chelsea, the market basket, and it's the biggest supermarket around. No one's going to push that aside. It's going to, because the price range and everything.
So we tried to pick a mix of businesses that were close, either close to water, on water, or very proximate to Winthrop. And the reason in the data that we show them all is so that everybody who reads it can pick up what they think is most interesting and relevant to them. So when we do show them, we show them all so that you can dive in just like you did to say, this is what I'm seeing here and this is what I'm seeing there. So it's just an array of different communities that we thought would be interesting to look at.
One of the things I'm seeing in this is that Winthrop is a classic bedroom community. We're 7 miles from the financial district in Boston. I think it's actually close to 5, but you did the mileage of it. We are, you know, I don't think anybody would debate the fact that the Blue Line is the best line in the MBTA. So you can get from, because I did it for years, you can get from the bus stop across the street to the corner of State Street and Congress Street in less than half an hour in the morning and pay a reasonable amount of money. And you can depend on doing that every day.
Yeah.
People then come home and they stay. We're a bedroom community. Whether that's good or bad, I don't know. That's been my perception. The other thing is I find that the local restaurants, I think we have a tremendous number of really good eclectic restaurants. And my wife and I will frequently on a Saturday night say, where are we going? Boom, boom, boom. You know, and we like to stay local. And invariably we'll go to these restaurants and usually we'll say, I don't know anybody here. I've lived here for a few years and I know a lot of people with her. As she lived here for more than a few years. And I think that's healthy that we have people coming in and we don't know. So I think those are strengths upon which we can build. I don't say that all the problems are solved. I would have a question though. This building opened 10 years ago. The building down at Fort Banks, the Gorman building, opened about 12 years ago. And ground will be broken on Tuesday for the middle school, high school. Have those positive, happenings had any influence that you saw in our study on people taking a second look, people, with young families who want to buy houses from people my age? Have those had any positive effect on people saying, this town is invested in education?
Sure.
Did you see any of that?
So we have steering committee members who, when you go around to the table, could really talked about their personal experience. So we absolutely talked about that. Whether that's showing up in the data yet, I'm not so sure. We saw the population go down. We do have some 2-year data that suggests that there might be an uptick, but it's not enough years to know that it's really definitive or as opposed to a blip. But the whole question of are we a bedroom community or not is a policy question. Are there positive aspects to that? There might be other aspects that aren't so. But you kind of, I think, started us to think about going forward. So I'm going to keep moving because I don't want to lose time. So first I want to again thank all of our steering committee members. They're now going to do all the heavy lifting for the rest of the evening. And we had a great mix of people with some really creative ideas. So the first thing we did was talk about a vision for Winthrop, which is actually on the wall, that's really tiny. So the vision that we came up with, and we really want your feedback on it, so you can write on the wall over there. Yeah, Vanna, thank you. Our vision is Winthrop will be home to a vibrant business economy that's uniquely its own. Walkable, attractive commercial districts with a mix of shops, restaurants, and services will draw residents and visitors into Winthrop throughout the week, during the day, and into the evening. Visitors will enjoy Winthrop's unique environment, including its beaches, harbors, marsh, and historic neighborhoods before stopping by local shops and restaurants nearby. Businesses will be readily accessed by a variety of transportation modes, including public transit, walking, bicycling, and driving. An array of jobs will be found in town that offer good wages and benefits and take advantage of the many talents that Winthrop residents have to offer. So that's our starting vision. I'm sure you guys will have other ideas. We want to write them down. And then in terms of strategies, which I think is part of what you were saying, acknowledge all the wonderful environmental resources we have. Draw people in who might want to come see the birds and the marsh and all those great things. Improve accessibility into and out of town and inside of town. It's very hard to move around. That's maybe why people are driving a lot. Create a strong town center and strong waterfront commercial districts. Increase the number of local jobs and try to align them with all the strengths that we have right here in the residents' population. Promote Winthrop as a great place to raise a family. And that's really what the school investment is that you are making that's really vitally important. And increase targeted regional marketing. Let people know all the great things that are here. So what we're going to do now is, again, we're going to have opportunity for you to go to different tables, talk to people who help contribute to these first ideas, and give your feedback on different topic areas. So we have different tables. We have unique environment, that's talking about the marshes and the beach, transportation, town center, quality jobs. Neighborhood commercial centers are those commercial areas that are just outside of the center. Financial self-determination, housing, customer base, arts history, and climate change. So maybe I can have people, I gave you guys on your table a little table things. What are we talking about? So we're at 8 o'clock right now. We're going to do 3 rounds of 20 minutes. Let me give you some ground rules first. So when we're at our tables, whenever we're talking, all ideas can be embraced. We don't have to debate. We just want to hear and absorb lots of information from you. We're going to do 18 minutes at each table, and then you can do 2 minutes of moving. And I'm going to tell you to move. I guess Girl Scouts, when one person raises their hand, every person that sees me raise my hand, raise your hand, and we're just going to quiet down, and we're going to stop, and we're going to move to another table. Does that all make sense? Okay.
First of all, this is, when they say environment, it's pretty comprehensive. It involves recreation too. You know, as we all know, Winthrop is a unique situation with Peninsula Beach. Beautiful beaches are soon to be another beautiful beach. There are many opportunities to access to
But I do want to...
you're like professional.
I have a ton of friends who are young with young kids. Yeah, living there.
Right.
And then the other piece is also just keep making it so that they shop locally.
Yeah, but let's look at how hard it was for one trip to actually expand. How many hoops they got just to get that place open.
At the end of summer. Oh, you're petite. Yeah. And quite honestly, people are like, someone said to me literally last week, you should be in the center. Excuse me, I'm in the center. And they're like, oh, where are you? I'm like, you're in the center right now. And I mean, they literally, it was like a surprise, you know. So I see that all the time.
We all think we should become more of a walking community.
And that includes the employees of the business owners themselves.
Yes.
Who, it's kind of a defeatist if you're going to try and attract your customers, you don't have your own employees take the prime parking spaces.
There's a lady over there who celebrity boutique, and her background is in fashion shows. You know, so we're looking at a lot of things that can be expanded on.
I asked a question about how many businesses in 1994, if you go back, there were 450 registered businesses. And I know this because that's the reason that I ran for office, was the lack of cooperation by the government the local government with small businesses. They don't cooperate. If I were gonna unload stock on my business on Winthrop Street, then I'm gonna get a ticket, and then I have to go to court, and the judge is gonna say she has a right to unload paper, etc., for 15 to 20 or 30 minutes. You know, there's so many things here.
There's so many young people. I think the difference, and one of the things we talked about in Winthrop, is that we don't necessarily have the type of housing stock that young professionals want to live in. We have, triple deckers where the first floor is here, and then your family and the other ones, and then your friend might be down in Point Shirley and you live in the center area. There's not the density of young people. They're spread everywhere. So when we talked about transformative projects where you can have the scale, young people typically want to live with other young people, and that's what makes the environment exciting. So
part of the town that we're trying to rezone, where we're going to allow the commercial section to add housing 2 or 3 stories on top of the existing commercial. So we'll have retail on the first floor, or professional offices on the first floor, restaurants on the first floor, and allow them to go 3 stories up. We're in the process of doing that. We're working with the town council, very close to finalizing.
About the beach and about the idea of the ferry and how the working ferry could help the beach. People in their 20s and 30s in Boston have automobiles less and less, and they travel around by T, and they take it, on summer days to Riviera Beach all day long, or down to Quincy. If we had a working, an active ferry that was consistent, they would jump on the ferry and take the ferry to Winthrop.
But there's an interesting situation. Again, to me, this all goes with, we need to develop 8 weekends of entertainment from July 4th to Labor Day.
And if you're a resident, you need to park in the center to get to your house. And so there's this competition between a residential center and a business center. And I think the town needs to decide, do they want a business center or a residential center? Because this mix is not working. It's just not working out.
It's underdeveloped area. It's hard to believe, but Short Drive should be from one end to the other, completely taken down. It would be a very hard proposition to do.
I mean, maybe the town manager wants to consider some tech guru or something, some social media guru to. I do.